You may remember a video I made last summer talking about Vancouver, Canada's TransLink, one of the best transit systems in North America, yet one that was very quickly headed off a steep fiscal cliff. The cliff in question was a $600 million annual deficit in the agency's budget, which would have caused at least 500,000 people to lose access to transit, and those who still had access would see a massive decline in frequency, capacity, and availability of transit service. This would have impacted all modes of transit in the region, from local buses to the West Coast Express, SkyTrain, and SeaBus, and taken Vancouver from one of the leading transit cities to one of the worst. And it wasn't just Vancouver. This issue is happening in cities throughout the US and Canada and will cause some of our best and brightest transit systems to crumble. If you haven't watched them yet, my videos on these topics have some context for what I talk about for the rest of this video. TransLink recently released its 2025 investment plan, which details a service increase rather than a cut. So, how did this happen? How did Vancouver save the bus? Before we get into the specifics, I want to give a quick shout out to the Movement YVR group, which worked tirelessly to campaign against major TransLink service cuts and for sustainable long-term transit funding. They went out and held events, talked to people at bus stops and on buses, and generally made enough noise about the issue that people paid attention, realized what was going on, and took action to help. They continue to advocate for better transit in Metro Vancouver and are a great group of people if you live in Vancouver. If your city has a similar group, I highly suggest checking them out. As a quick review, there are three main factors causing TransLink's fiscal cliff: lower fare revenue than before the pandemic, inflation causing expenses to increase, and reduced revenue from the gas tax as people buy electric cars. TransLink's operational funding is mostly from tax revenue, such as property tax, a levy on residential electricity, gas tax, and an off-street parking tax. Additionally, the agency gets money from passenger fares, advertising on buses and trains, and funding from the provincial government. Increasing funding from each of these buckets is important for a balanced funding portfolio, and it means that if one of these elements goes down a little in the future, it doesn't mean that the entire agency will fall off a fiscal cliff. The first funding increase was unfortunately a fare increase, although not a massive one, and still held under the rate of inflation. With the fare increase, the average one-way fare to ride a TransLink service will go up 5%, compared to the typical annual increase of about 2%. The ad fare to leave the YVR airport area is also increasing from $5 to $6.50, the first such increase since the Canada Line opened to serve the airport in 2009. Most of the fare increases will actually be used to expand service, and other sources will be used to resolve the fiscal cliff. It's not all on passengers to fund transit. Since gas tax revenues have been declining, the off-street parking sales tax is being raised to help fill the gap, which will provide a more stable source of long-term funding, especially in a city like Vancouver that doesn't have a ton of parking, so the parking is typically busy. Additionally, there will be a small property tax increase across the region, which will help provide a somewhat stable funding base for the agency. Finally, the province is stepping in to help. The BC government provided a one-time funding package of $312 million in early 2025 to help TransLink get through 2025 and 2026. In 2027, the provincial government has pledged to implement a stronger long-term funding program for transit in the province, which will hopefully spell a more sustainable funding model that allows TransLink to run their services with less worries of running out of money. All of this together means that TransLink will have a much better ability to run transit service and will be able to do so reliably until at least 2027, when better long-term funding is implemented. Additionally, they'll finally be able to expand service, something that is sorely needed in Metro Vancouver as transit vehicles face higher and higher levels of overcrowding. While the increases aren't major, they're not bad. More than 50 routes across the system will see increased service to address overcrowding and improve the rider experience. One route will be added to the agency's frequent transit network, being upgraded to run every 15 minutes every day. Train cars will be added to West Coast Express on crowded trains. Additional routes will see frequency increases to help serve regional parks, and more parks will see service in the summer with specialized park-focused routes. TransLink will also expand coverage of its bus network by adding a new route serving residential neighborhoods in Burnaby, adding more service to industrial areas, and expanding service on a few limited service routes to run for more time of the day, providing access to more residents and businesses. Finally, the agency is working to expand its bus rapid transit service, with an extension of the R2 Rapid Bus from North Vancouver to Metrotown Station in Burnaby opening in 2027. This extension will provide much-needed capacity relief to the busy Willingdon corridor, as well as preparing for a stronger network of true BRT lines that will be implemented in the coming years. This map of transit improvements looks a lot better than last summer's map, which showed potential service decreases, and is exactly what the Metro Vancouver region needs. More transit in a place that's already so friendly towards it is always a good thing, and is really the only solution we can afford. Streets and highways are facing higher congestion levels than ever, and taking away crowded buses and trains would make that congestion unbearable. However, this isn't just good news for Vancouver. This win can be used as inspiration for other transit agencies facing major fiscal cliffs. These are more common than you might think at this point. Transit agencies in cities like Portland, San Diego, and San Francisco are continuing to see financial troubles projected into the future, and we need to act quickly to save their funding before it's too late. Without sustainable long-term funding, these transit agencies will slash service, become a shell of their former selves, and be far less useful to the cities and regions they serve. Vancouver has shown us that our transit agencies can enter two different types of cycles. Vancouver chose a virtuous cycle, where investing in more transit service leads to more ridership, which leads to justification to run even more transit service, pulling people out of cars and onto fast, frequent, and reliable buses, trains, and ferries. However, if other cities facing this issue don't act fast, they'll enter a death spiral. Lower transit service levels will mean that fewer people will ride, which in turn will give local, state, and federal governments less reason to fund transit, and so on until effective public transportation is a thing of the past. So, look up your local transit agency in the news. If they're having financial troubles, speak up. Go to board meetings and city council meetings. Talk to people and ask for more transit funding to not only bridge funding gaps, but provide sustainable long-term funding to maintain and expand transit networks. Every city needs transit, and letting your transit system die, even if you don't ride transit, puts every other aspect of urban transportation into a downward spiral. Let's fight for better transit and more livable cities for all.